I think it's probably customary for someone to thank you at this point for bringing you on the show, and you have been a very gracious host, but I got to be honest, I really did not want to do this. I did not want to come today because debates like this, these public debates, kind of give a false impression to the people who are watching that there must be some type of scientific debate going on. And that's just not the case. There is no serious debate within the scientific community about the occurrence of evolution. That's not something that's going on. Now, I know that Lawrence will probably talk about the debates that he's had, right? And we have to be honest about this. He's not being invited by faculties of science to bring new information from this idea of creation science, which is an entirely, it's a misnomer, right? So this is not an area of discovery that they're bringing him in to talk about, right? These are not scientific debates. These are usually other groups, usually creationist groups that are asking and inviting the creationist speakers to come in. The faculties of science are not teaching anything to do with creation science or any type of creationism. That's not what science does. I believe Lawrence gave you a definition of science, and I think it very correctly limits science. Let's see, I can't read it.
It's got a cheat sheet there, has it?
Yes, he does. It says it's the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world, right? So that's what science limits itself to. It doesn't go to spiritual belief systems. It doesn't go to religious text to try to find out what the answer is first, and then go and find whatever might support that, ignoring everything else. This whole idea of young Earth creationism is not supported by science, like you were talking about earlier. There is no scientific information that would counter evolution in the way that Lawrence claims that it does, and there is no evidence for the Earth being young. These things are not found in science. There is no debate in science. Now, my debate skills shouldn't also be taken to be something that determines this, because no matter how I do on this show, and I know that Lawrence has a series out that says how to debate an evolutionist and never lose, right? So he may very well take the room on debate skills, but it doesn't make any kind of point as to whether or not there is a debate in science.
That, by the way, is a wonderful debating point to use that you've just had, so you should bring out your own video, how to beat evolution. Anyway, the point he made, though, and we'll get onto the content and evidence or lack of, that majority opinion doesn't really mean anything intellectually. Majority opinion can believe all sorts of mythology, and maybe 100 years ago, 150 years ago, the majority of scientists in a university would have had the opposing point of view. Does that have any effect on truth, the fact that the majority of scientists today would support your position?
Well, I think you have to ask yourself, why does the majority think this way? And I think that's because the data supports it. Now, he's mentioning lists of hundreds of scientists. I assume that he's talking about particular lists of, is this the Discovery Institute list, Lawrence, that you're talking about?
That's only one of many.
Well, we can talk about that.
I have three pages here, biologists with full credentials that refer to...
That'll make interesting television, reading out long names with long credentials.
Sure, but the point here is that science isn't done by a show of hands. We don't have a conference say, oh, okay, well, we have this interesting scientific question. Who thinks it's this? And everyone raises their hands. Okay, who thinks it's this? Everybody, oh, well, more people think this, and that's the way reality really is. No, it's actually borne out by the data. And you can have a minority opinion if it is supported by the data. And then you have a point to come with on that minority opinion. But the people that are on these lists many times are signing things. The statements that generate these lists are worded very carefully. They'll say, oh, well, we're skeptical about natural selection as being the only mechanism or a mechanism or something like this, right? Well, there are lots of mechanisms that are perfectly natural and perfectly supported by science, but the way these things are worded, it's kind of tricky. A lot of these, especially the Discovery Institute list that I'm sure Lawrence is familiar with and is touted often as being an anti-evolution list of scientists, but it's really worded so that an ardent evolutionist could sign that, being perfectly understanding and their own idea that, yes, of course, evolution is supported by the data, but this particular statement fits right in with my nature for skepticism of all things, and also my knowledge that there are other mechanisms.
You mentioned religion. I understand that science is not meant to be religion-based, and I think most people would agree with that. But some would argue that science has become a religion in itself, that in the race to expunge religion or religiosity from scientism, in a way, it has become an alternative form of worship. So a scientist will do anything to avoid any belief in God, any reference to God, any reference to a sacred text. Are you being completely objective now in the scientific field?
Me personally, or
science
people
in general.
Science in general. Right. Well, see, the thing about science is it doesn't say anything one way or another on the existence of God or what God may or may not do. Now, there are individual scientists, right? Scientists who will say, oh, no, there is no God. That's not a scientific statement. Scientists will say, oh, yes, I believe in God. That's not a scientific statement either. Science is completely silent on the issue of God, religion, right? If you are doing something and the results of what you are doing depend upon your personal belief or disbelief in God or religion, if your results depend on that belief, then what you're doing isn't science.
Is it possible that a number of people in the scientific field come to the table, as it were, with a disbelief in God, and that does influence their findings?
I don't know if it would influence their findings.
Their approach?
Perhaps. Now, I think you could say the same of people who have a Christian background,
yes,
who approach science and say, well, my Christian belief leads me into a direction of serving mankind in such a way that I want to scientifically study the nature of a disease, right? So in serving man and serving God, they would certainly be scientific and materialistic in their methodology. Right, but maybe their motivation is out of their own Christianity or whatever religion it happens to be.
They've been very nice to each other. When we come back, they'll start being really cruel and nasty. That's what we want. Back in a few moments on the Michael Curran Show. What's the commercial credential, Dave, aren't we? Welcome back to Michael Curran Show. Creation, evolution. We've brought the debate back. Popular demand. But you heard what the man had to say. You might as well just leave at this point. And you heard what the man had to say. You might as well just leave at this point. And you heard what the man had to say. You might as well just leave at this point.